Our next session is a panel discussion on driving measurable results in diversity and inclusion through objectives and key results. To lead us through this panel, we have Vesi Tasheva, the founder of Vesi.com, a strategic D&I and cultural services and a mental health and anti-racism advocate. Originally Bulgarian and based out of Ireland, Vesi works with Fortune 500 clients across Europe and North America. She was named by Hive Learning as one of 2019's most influential D&I leaders globally and one of UK's most influential D&I leaders in 2020. Prior to being a founder, Vesi has worked as a chief strategy officer of a talent tech startup, as well as a number of roles across product marketing and culture for large and medium companies. Thank you so much, Vesi, for being a part of this panel discussion, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Rodinov. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm really excited that we'll be talking specifically about OKRs and how to, benefit from them in diversity and inclusion. It's so hard to see measurable results, and I have some great panelists joining me today to share their perspective on how they do it in the organization and how they do it as a consultant. So I will welcome on stage Theresa Palmer. She's the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at BAE Systems Applied Intelligence, and Tina Mary, Lead Corporate Consultant and Trainer with Cultural Intelligence Center. So welcome both. It's great to see you.
Hi, Bessie. Thank you
very much.
Let's start with just a short introduction. I introduced your roles, but tell us about yourselves just in a minute or so people can get a little bit of a context who they're listening to as we're talking about OKRs and measurable results in diversity and inclusion.
Sure. Tina, do you want to lead off or would you like me to?
Go for it, Theresa.
So as Bessie said, my name's Theresa Palmer, and I am indeed the head of diversity and inclusion for BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. I have actually worked in the technology industry for just over 20 years now. Just say just over, I think that's plenty. I've held quite a number of roles actually. So coming into D&I was really fun for me actually. As I started out my career in, I started out my educational career in psychology and then moved into business administration, but with a focus in organizational change and behavior. And then went into finance, project management, and then sort of into account management, and then actually customer success, which I always say led me into the greatest customer. So it's really focused on success of customers, how you bring them around, how you create that customer journey and a customer experience. So when I came into D&I, I think all of those things sort of perfect stormed together to be able to hopefully give me a really well-rounded view on the way that we work with employees, as well as how we then reach out beyond that into our customer base. So that's my elevator pitch about me. I'm sure I've left out something really.
It's a great background because it's such a cross-functional role, and in a way we can say diversity and inclusion is about still about customer success, but also employee success, right? Thank you, Theresa. And Tina.
Yes, hi, Tina Mary. I'm joining today from Vancouver, Canada, and I am with the Cultural Intelligence Center. I've also spent a couple of decades in the software and tech industry, more than mostly in the games industry, and I've been working with global leaders and teams and navigating this conversation around culture and the impact of diversity and the way we work together. But actually, it wasn't until 2018 that I had the aha moment. I learned about the Cultural Intelligence Framework. I had to go out and meet Dr. Livermore and get certified. I was really excited. And so today I'm really blessed. I have my dream job. My job is a lead consultant in the Cultural Intelligence Center. We're a training and consulting organization, and our work is really centered around the CQ research, which is based on over 2 decades of work centering around how do we work more effectively in a culturally diverse context. So that's really the heart and root of our work. And in my role, I'm working really closely with human resources, D&I and L&D team leaders to really try and help how we can improve inclusion, how we can improve intercultural performance. And my expertise is around the operationalized aspect. So how do we take my experience as an operational leader, take the CQ framework and the conversations around inclusion and make them applicable? because we really truly believe at the Cultural Intelligence Center that CQ can and should be the strategic link to how we're managing our diversity efforts. So I'm really excited to be here as part of this panel and talk about some of the things we're doing. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thanks, Tina. So yeah, I mean, it's so hard to work nowadays without any knowledge of cultural diversity and having, the intelligence around that and how to bring it to work with everyone working remotely, teams just based across the world. So I'm curious, Tina, what's the role of OKRs in the D&I work that you deliver?
Really, I mean, when we get down to it, it's about trying to understand what the core mission is for the organization, helping them have a sense of purpose. We see this common challenge that organizations are trying to tick a box relative to training, and they think it's this magic bullet that's going to solve things. So it's really critical we help them take that step back and go, what are we focusing on? There are 3 words in DEI. Is it about diversity? Is it about equity? Is it about inclusion? Where are we focusing our efforts, our energy, and our attention? And so to me, that's why we need to have a begin with the end in mind, an overarching goal, before we can really start measuring and seeing impact.
Yeah, like it happens so often. Just everyone's like, yeah, we want that, silver bullet, have a few trainings, and it's all sorted out. And just bringing everyone back to, no, it's also about the process, and then, introducing the measurements in place. I think OKRs keep us accountable. Accountable. What was the objective in the first place? Not if we have just activities, right?
Exactly. It's focusing on results and outcomes versus ticking boxes of activities. And it's also helping the diversity and inclusion leaders and other leaders involved in these efforts demonstrate that the work is making an impact. How can we show impact if we're not measuring what we're doing? We have to start with, having this overarching goal. And then translating that into the KPIs, the specific ways that we can measure it. We can't get there without those OKRs, those high-level objectives in the first place.
I see it also very extremely helpful when we're trying to secure budgets and we're trying to drive urgency, right? Because if we can't show the results, if we cannot show how the objectives and the key results come together, it's really hard to get funding for the following year and so on. Not just as a consultant, because like both you and I are consultants, but in a company like I'd be curious. I'll ask Theresa in a little bit. So Tina, can you tell me? So, like you're in a privileged position in the sense that you can work with so many great companies, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you see companies face right now? And how do you measure success when you work with them?
Yeah, it does go back to the question you just asked about OKRs, and it's not having them or not having a very clear and sustainable strategy for how they're going to achieve outcomes and results. So it's something that needs to connect the organization's business and their mission. We need clear alignment on why it's important before we can start really making any progress. And so when we don't have clear strategy, that means we're not addressing changes at a systems level because we don't understand what we need to change. We're not building in accountability, and we're not measuring progress and impact. And so really, the very first question I'm asking any client I'm engaging with is why? Why are we having this conversation? What event has happened, or what circumstance are you faced with, or what opportunity do you foresee that leads us to be having this conversation? We have to start with that why, and then build that sustainable strategy that supports that objective. And it's absolutely the top most critical issue that we see. It's that sense that we can just deliver a training, we can deliver an event, we can set up a committee, and we're good to go.
Check, yeah.
Exactly.
I love the question around why. I also ask why now? Why not, when they come in and it's like, we need it now. And I'm like, why not 2 years ago? Or why not 2 years from now?
Yeah,
So Theresa, I'm curious. I'll take you back to the previous question that we were looking at with Tina. So, what's the role of OKRs in your role in your D&I work?
Yeah, so you know what? It's taken on such an important place in our workplace, and so I've been in my role just shy of 5 years now, and we didn't have a formal D&I role previous to that, and so we've been on a real journey actually. And while it was important at the beginning, you have to figure out how to get there, right? You've got to climb that ladder. And so what we found over the last few years is we've been able to help sort of actually prove the business case, if you will, for OKRs. And I find that one of the biggest challenges that you hit in the early stages of it, particularly in embedding a program within any organization, is it's the I side of D&I. Nobody wants to admit that being inclusive should be measurable, because it should just be the right thing, right? We want to create a great place for people to work where they can thrive and they can be accepted and everything that goes along with it. But to be able to strip that back and actually be able to evidence to people, and OKRs does this, right? To be able to evidence that we're being inclusive and that we're doing that and that we're doing the right things is exactly as you folks have just been saying. Why do you want to do this? And then is it working? Because we don't always get it right. And so being able to measure if something's working, to me, is actually the greatest sense of inclusion. So not just because it's the right thing, but because it's the right thing for the population and right for the customer that we're servicing. So how do you actually make sure that you've not just listened to them, responded to a need, delivered a need, but then found out if that was actually, because you never know, right? If what somebody says they want is what they're looking for. So for us, being able to start putting those into place, and we've done a real drive on it this year around setting core themes across the business, setting objectives across all of them, and then making sure that in the areas that we're delivering around accountability and measurability, we've then got priorities within those areas. And I think that Bessie, you and Tina just recently said, and the previous bit was around, why do you want this? What are we going for? Is this now or is this 2 years from now? And again, when you look at the I side of the D&I, it's sometimes difficult, but it's necessary, like any other area of your business, to be able to say, that's really important and it's a priority. It's just not a priority right now, because we need to do X, Y, and Z. And without those, we can't go leaps and bounds. And there's so much to do in the D&I space that if you don't set those objectives and you don't actually look at the key results, I would challenge that most organizations and most consultants aren't going to be able to achieve very much, because it's so broad and there's so much that you can do without setting objectives and then measuring against them. You don't ever actually get anywhere tangible. And it's the tangible that makes the change, the real change. You can make little differences that impact, some people, but we want to be driving huge change. We want to change, organizations. We want to change the world at the end of the day, right? We want to change the way everybody's doing things. And so we drive every other area of our business with objectives and with measurable, results. So why wouldn't we do it, quite frankly, in the D&I space?
I love that. Sometimes I tell my clients, you don't do sales for 1 quarter and then postpone it for, till the 3rd quarter, right? You do it all the time. You do sales every day. You do the same with marketing or HR, people team, everything. So why with diversity and inclusion, it should be different when the culture and our experiences are something that, that we go through every single day. And, when I work with clients, I create a heat map for them. I benchmark their scores. So even when they come in with the generic, we want to create an inclusive space, or we want to be the top employer in, let's say, B2B SaaS or whatever, aspiration they have. That's very broad. As you were saying, it's very broad. So let's make it specific. What are the numbers? And then we can measure. And when we see how the different employee segments are performing differently, now they need to keep themselves accountable, especially when we see big differences between, a majority group versus an underrepresented group. And it becomes very, very clear. So I have another question for you, Theresa. So, being a chief diversity officer is one of the hottest roles right now. It's unfortunate that it doesn't get the same budgets that I would say a chief technology officer or chief innovations officer would get when they're just as well transforming the whole organization. Because like as a chief diversity officer, everything is your business and your responsibility, but you have different resources in a way. But I'm curious, for you, like, how long do you think should be a tenure for this role, and how do you set the OKRs for yourself to know that you're successful in the time that you have with the company? But maybe some observations in general, how people maybe should be approaching that.
Do you know what's funny is I probably have a really boring answer to this, but I think it's important, right? Because we talked about setting OKRs, and this is how all business areas operate. So why not D&I? In some ways, you look at the question and say, why would you ask that of a chief diversity officer and not of every other chief officer in the business? And so to me, and at the end of the day, it's what we do a lot in diversity and inclusion too, when we're talking about development and succession planning and all that. We need to actually just be having open discussions. And so for me, it's a combination of a personal and professional decision, and one that you have to just keep checking in on. I think you have to set, same thing with the OKRs, you have to set a goal like you would with any role of, what do I want to achieve here? And what do I think done looks like? Knowing that D&I is never done. But from a professional, that's the personal and professional side of it combined, isn't it? Of what do I want to do by the time I finish this role? And what do I want it to do to develop me to be able to take it to the next, to be able to take it to the next level? And where do I want to go with it? So I personally don't think that there should be a standard tenure on it. I think the only sort of waypoint, my husband and I have a motto in our household, and that is, I would much prefer to leave a job 6 months too early than 6 months too late. And I think you can apply that to any role, but I think for D&I, particularly for D&I actually though, I think that one's really, really important. And if you can keep asking yourself, and I think you should check every 6 months to a year in any role, but D&I is such an important role in an organization, and it drives so much, and it can be such an inspirational role, and you can drive such tangible change, not just for people's careers, but for them as a person, at home and at work. I think as D&I leaders, we should all be looking to leave a job 6 months too early, because if we're leaving 6 months too late, then we've started to lag a bit. And that's what I find in any career. You tend to be at the back end of it, and you're slowing down, and you're not putting the same drive into it. So I think if you can pick up 6 months too early, and that's very personal for me as to what that would be for every individual. So it's the same thing. Set some OKRs, constantly check them, monitor if they're working, see if you're making the progress that you want against them. But be open with your organization about it too, because again, from a succession planning standpoint, you should be working with others around you to develop them to be able to take on the responsibility and the accountability for whoever the next leader is that steps in. So slightly boring answer, might feel like a non-answer, but that to me is the best answer you can give for it.
I don't think it's boring. I think maybe it's a bit philosophical, but it makes a lot of sense, because like any relationship, whether it's with an organization or with an individual, it's better if we don't overstay. If we shouldn't be there for maybe we're at a different stage of our life now or whatever it is. So I strongly agree with you. So I want to ask Tina, so when you look at the OKRs with your clients, with your partners, you look at the key results, you go back to the objective, like who is the one who's actually reviewing the data? And what do you do with this information? Like, is it you reviewing the data? Is it your partners? Is it your client? Is it everyone? Like, who holds the OKRs?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of all of those. I think, again, it depends on the KPI and the OKR that we're working on. But absolutely, we're working with the HR and leadership group, executive leadership. And as an example, one organization I'm working with right now is on the discovery phase, and they recognize this is a journey. So they're starting with CQ as a foundation to create the skills they need to create an inclusive organization. We've gone through surveys, small group discussions, meeting with the diversity and inclusion team to really digest that information, working and collaborating with them to understand what do we think the message is to the executive leadership? How does this help inform us for the mission for the organization? What does that look like? So it's really informing all of us. It's informing myself. What intervention activities? As an example, one of the things we would clearly measure is the CQ scores. Your cultural intelligence is measurable. We can define it through assessments. And we want to make sure that we're creating intervention strategies to improve those skills. When we go back, we take the scores again, we see those results. So yes, absolutely. Everybody needs to be involved in looking at the data at all stages and understanding what it means. This is going to mean different parts to different parts of the business as well. It might inform our managers and our direct individual contributors very differently than it does our DEI or executive leadership. So also communicating the data in a way that's relevant to the audience that's involved and needs to know. And it could be external stakeholders, to your point earlier, when we were talking about this. Is it the community members that we engage with? Are we engaging with a diverse set of partners in the community? Maybe they're the ones that want to hear what our mission's all about, and what those outcomes are and what they mean to us in the business.
I loved what you said there. Like everyone needs to be informed, the whole time, basically. And I think that level of transparency organically drives accountability. But also people are not just like informed, it's not just a memo or an email or a Slack notification. It's actually reminding people how the big picture and that specific action or result or impact, small impact are coming together. I feel like for we were talking about marketing and sales, people never forget how those relate, their daily action with that big picture, like IPO or whatever they're looking at. And in D&I, the aspirational with the day-to-day, people forget. It's like they're in different universes almost. And we need the OKRs and, a platform where everyone can almost be reminded of that all the time. What's your experience with that, Theresa, in, internally when you do that?
Yeah, to be honest, Tina's hit the nail on the head, and you can, the way she described it, you can apply it to anything. It makes total sense. And I think that's exactly what she said is what we're doing. You have to make sure that, right, you set the OKRs. This is what immediately evidences why they're important. You set the OKRs, and then you want to be able to communicate back to everybody. I think everybody should be looking at them. I believe in complete transparency with numbers. It's otherwise there's lots of reasons that people think that you're trying to hide them, and there's nothing to hide. When you share it with everybody, everybody feels a sense of attachment to it and wants to help. If there's a problem, wants to help the problem instead of poke holes in it. So to me, that's really important. The OKRs give you your actionable audience, right? And how you then need to present it to them. So once you set those goals and those objectives, the individuals that are truly accountable, the day-to-day activities of carrying them out, and then you put together your reports for them, and you sit down with them on a regular basis, and they report back on their activity against them. So I think that question answers sort of the session question immediately, like about why are OKRs important? Because it's what drives an organization, and it tells you, one, yes, everybody should see it, but two, who are the key people that need to be driving this? How do you make them accountable? By looking at that data with them regularly and saying, how are you doing against, same way they would anything else? How are you tracking against this? And if there needs to be an intervention put in place to try and meet an objective because we're falling behind, then you're able to do that.
An interesting thing I also wanted to share about this conversation that I've seen going on in my local community in BC, in British Columbia, there's a group called HR Tech. And they are working on a diversity in tech dashboard. So they're actually pulling together these numbers, these OKRs, the KPIs. They're asking organizations to self-report on their efforts in these areas so that as a community, we can all benefit from what we're learning from these. And I'm sure there's other organizations out there that are doing this. So it's, again, that's another way that we might be utilizing this information at a macro level to make a difference in our communities and in our industries.
That's fantastic. Do you know, is there like a landing page somewhere where we can sign up so that we know when it's launched? Because it's just getting set up as we
It's
speak.
actually actively launched already. So I'm happy to send a link to the dashboard to this group.
Because this is really interesting to see a whole community coming together and putting something like this available for people. Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. And so the link will be here underneath in a second. So, you know, we talked a lot about the benefits, the clarity. For people who maybe are not using OKRs just yet in their D&I work, or maybe have just started with that, and you know, both of you have much more experience with that. What would be your advice to them? Where should they start? How should they advance? Maybe some mistakes that they should avoid. You know, maybe things that you have done but they could avoid. Athena, let's start with you.
I think it's this understanding that there's going to be some individuals who are not going to buy into this conversation, right? That's probably one challenge we need to be honest with and face right away. There are many individuals in the organization who are going to feel that your diversity and inclusion efforts are a zero-sum game. There's nothing in it for them. There's only things that they're going to lose. And so really clarifying again, going back to that why is it important? It's not just, is it just the right thing to do? Is there more to it than that? What conversations do we need to have? That is critical to the success of any initiative. You have to start there. The other thing I've seen happen is that there's an assumption of what problems need to be fixed. Have we checked that? Is there engagement surveys? Is there conversations going on? And if we're running surveys, if we're looking at data, are we looking at it demographically as well? Because we might see some information informing us at a macro level, but once we analyze it within the unique demographics that exist within an organization, we might realize that there's quite a different outlook for some members of our population. So again, it's just that getting back to the clarity of why are we doing this?
Yeah, the assumptions element is so key, because like of course some of those assumptions are right. They're based on observations, typically from the people team. Typically I treat those as hypotheses, and then we test them, you know, as you said, like through the survey, through the interviews with the employees, etc. And then we can objectively say, has it been validated or not? And it's interesting because like when you look at the list at the end, you know, you were equally sure about all of them, and for some you're like, oh, okay, I guess this one was not true, but you know, the majority maybe were true at the end, but knowing which one is which, right? And Theresa, how about you? What would be your advice?
Yeah, well, unsurprisingly, I do totally agree with what Tina said, and that's sort of where I would have started too, is sitting down, not unlike what you said earlier, Bessie. Where do we want to start? That's what I would tell people, is to always sit down in the same way you would with a customer problem, sit down and workshop it. Where do we want to start? Where do we want to get to? Or actually, where do we want to get to? And how do we start getting there? And I think one of the things that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, because we automatically feel, I think, really far behind the curve in D&I, it's people's natural instinct to want to pick up and run. And so I think people get very uncomfortable with the idea of slowing down to speed up, which is something we've all heard throughout our careers. But I think for D&I, it's incredibly true and incredibly important to remember that we can't do it all at once. Where do we want to get to? What are the priorities? How do we go and get those? And then I quote my MD very, very frequently. And I know he didn't coin the phrase, but I don't know who did. So I give him credit for it, that he, years ago, when we were kicking off a new initiative, you know, one of the things he said to all the leaders is, don't be afraid to fail, just fail fast. And so I think that it's really important to fail fast. Don't be afraid to try things. Definitely go and ask, though. At the start of everything, don't make assumptions. And I've said it in our boardroom of, we can sit here with the 10 or 12 of us and come up with what we think the problem is. If we don't ever ask people, we're just guessing. It's just an assumption, and they don't have that old phrase about making assumptions for no reason. It's important, I think, to know where you want to get to, sit down and figure that out. Don't be afraid to go slow at first, but then don't be afraid to fail fast. So those to me are the three key things to starting out if you haven't done it yet, or if you're in your early stages.
And can we give a specific example of what an OKR or OKRs in your organization, or respectively with your clients, look like? Maybe Tina, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we work across sectors, as you may know. We work in the corporate and education and government sectors. So this example is specific to the education sector, but I think you can easily see how it translates across different sectors. So it's about access and equity. The overarching OKR was achieve access and equitable opportunities for achievement for all students, faculty, and staff, and particularly for underrepresented groups such as people of color or physically challenged. So this high-level objective translated into a number of goals. The first goal, for example, diversity and faculty of staff reflect our student diversity. And then we have ways to specifically measure our progress against that through actions and KPIs and timelines, where we get down to the specifics. Well, how are we going to ensure that we have a diversification? What will the steps take? And so we get more and more micro in terms of the next steps. But that's sort of that macro view of here we've got this overarching objective. Here's how it translates into a goal that we can now move against. Now let's get it down to something specific. Does that help?
That's incredible about OKRs, right? Because you can have, the macro and the micro. I recently authored a white paper on how to use OKRs in diversity and inclusion. And, we actually included a real example from one of my clients, Reward Gateway, and you can see how their business strategy objectives, the highest level in the organization, connect to the specific, like child objective, and then, etc., just down the tree, the OKR tree, to the specific key results related to, specific trainings. And just putting this together, anyone can understand it. I think that's transformative. And you spoke, Tina, about how some people feel like they will be losing, like it's a losing game for them when diversity and inclusion is brought to the table. And that brings me to the next question. What is your advice? And it's a question to both of you on how we engage, unite, or change hearts and minds of those who fear diversity and inclusion. Maybe they feel like it's not for them. Maybe they feel isolated by that. Maybe they're scared of it, or they just don't care. So how can we maybe include that in the OKRs, or actually any kind of advice? Because I think it's a big problem for every single company.
It really is. For me, I'll just speak first quickly. It's about stories. It's really about sharing authentic stories. It needs to, in an organization, it has to be from the top as well. It can't be a message coming from the chief diversity officer. It's got to be from the very top of the organization, a consistent message, and sharing authentic stories. What does diversity mean to me looks very different to everybody. I faced my own inclusion challenges working in an industry where gender balance doesn't exist still to this day, and it didn't 15 years ago. It's just not a reality. So we all have had these challenges in our careers and times, no matter who we are, where we felt like we're isolated. We're not part of the in-group. We've all experienced this. Everybody, it doesn't matter who you are and what your ethnicity or your background is. I know that every person in their life has experienced this. So when we can bring that and make that real for people and help them understand these stories and contextualize it more for them, we can take them along easier on the journey. And also recognizing we will never take 100% of people along the journey. It's understanding we need to find our champions, our people who are really advocating these conversations, and help them drive the energy and the focus and the forward motion, and not spend too much energy influencing people who just aren't ever going to be influenced. Over to you, Theresa. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that last point was one of the things that was the first thing that came to my mind when Bessie asked the question was, I have to be okay with the fact that not everyone's going to get on board. It is my job, and I'm actually really drawn to the people that are not interested. I think it's important to speak to them, because sometimes in those conversations, you find out that you're missing a message because D&I topics can come on so strong. We forget it's human nature to resist change. So sometimes just our messaging is what turns people off. And we just need to be able to, like Tina says, use different stories to be able to get to them. But equally, just try to figure out what it is that they don't like. So it's not just throwing messaging around, but what is it that you don't agree with? What is it that's offending you, if it's offending them?
Yes.
And what could we be doing? What could we be doing? Asking that question, what can I be doing differently? And acknowledgement, right? Diversity and inclusion means everybody.
That's right.
Everybody's diverse in their own way, and everybody should feel included. And so sometimes acknowledging that to people, I work in technology, we do a lot around gender. And so I am a woman talking to a lot of men about why I should be included. And it is, like Tina said, can be really intimidating that what some men are seeing, and I get it. I get it when I hear it, is you don't want me to progress in my career because you want her to. And you don't want to fill roles with, my son. I've got 2 sons. I sometimes look at it and think,
Exactly.
it's going to be really hard for them. I don't want it to be easy for them. But it's, you can see why people as individuals, as parents, as aunts and uncles, and as people, immediately we're human beings. We're defensive about, how does this affect me? And so we need to make the messaging really strong about what's in it for me, because that's our human nature. So it's about fighting that natural human instinct to resist change, and try to not be offended by it, right? My job is to not get offended, but to listen and go, okay, most folks might be offended by it, but I'm actually just really intrigued about why this isn't important to you. Well, I've had someone say that to me once. I think about my my strategy, and it was about, what would you say to me saying that this, this doesn't that none of this resonates with me? And it is such an all-encompassing strategy, and we had such great responses to it, and I thought, wow, and I just really wanted to talk to them, because I thought, how is it you don't see something in this for you? I mean, it hits everything. How is it that you don't see that connection? And that's my job, is to go and ask those questions, and fail fast too, right? When I see someone who just doesn't want to, just might not want to, and I can't spend all my time on that individual, and it'll be a small percentage. Eventually, it's going to be a small percentage of people. So it's about being able to recognize them, not shut them out immediately, but know when your work is done.
Yeah. You said, Theresa, the message, and yes, it's about an inclusive message, but I think understanding what are the barriers that are stopping us from delivering that message right now in a way that engages them, or maybe they would never feel engaged and fully on board, but at least they don't feel threatened, or at least they feel heard as well, right? So, for example, when I do the interviews with different employee segments, to kind of validate some of the findings from the surveys, etc., one of the employee segments is, this group specifically, the group that is not on board, to understand what is the narrative for them, what are their experiences. And it's interesting to see, it's not that this person as an individual doesn't want to, be exposed to any kind of diversity and inclusion. They're usually uncomfortable about a couple of topics, and the others are fine. So even as we have the interview, because my job there is to listen, to be empathetic to whatever point of view they have. I don't have to approve it, or but I have to be accepting of it. Is to help them also see, okay, so you're comfortable with all of these and you're not comfortable with those couple of things. You know what? I would actually benefit from your feedback when I'm maybe putting a training together for your team, because your input is different. So I need that kind of input. And it's very interesting to see the transformation, because like if I've been listening to this person for like 35, 40 minutes, and in the end I say, like, your opinion is valuable. I need this. Like, it's about everyone's inclusion. And, you know, are you working remotely? Yes. Do you have mental health? Yes. So how is diversity and inclusion for the others and not for you? I need your feedback on, you know, let's say the LGBTQ training or whatever that is making that person uncomfortable. So absolutely not just messaging in a like a tactic, but getting their feeling their experience the way we would approach any underrepresented group. I'm curious. That's the last question now. Is there like a quote or something that keeps you on track with yourself on why you're doing D&I work? It doesn't have to be a quote. It could be, I don't know, mantra or your own philosophy. Like, I don't know, whatever one sentence that, you know, keeps you excited to wake up in the morning.
Oh, two words came to mind: tenacity and resilience.
I was thinking, measure what matters most.
I love those. Mine is happiness. It's fulfillment. It's when what you think, say, and do are in harmony, but also acknowledging when they're not, because, you know, we do have our, you know, we can't be perfect all the time. So also understanding that. Yeah. And in D&I, we cannot be an expert in everything. We cannot nail everything. Again, you know, the cross-functional aspect of it, and we need everyone's support so that, you know, we can do things together. Thank you so much, Theresa and Tina. It has been such a pleasure to chat today.
Oh, no problem. I will give my philosophical one, because I did my really hard words one. But I had a coach growing up who used to always say to us, and it is a famous quote, but he always used to say, "If it is to be, it is up to me." And I do try to instill that in everyone, because it's not just about me. But if you can get most, right, you're not going to get everyone. If you can get most people thinking it, then hopefully you start pushing the wall to another location.
I like that whole "it's not all about me," right?
Yeah,
it's a really good sentiment. Well done. Thank you so much, both. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you guys very much.